Hello guys, welcome to Daddy Share Space and welcome to my channel. So today I just want to touch on my Lamello Zeta P2 and specifically why I purchased it. Alright, so if we take a look over here at this bench that I was working on, it was basically a stool, but I'm calling it a bench, if you will. So if you take a look here, you can see that the seams are pretty good. Right here you can see a little bit of a separation. Let me see if I can get this tangled up. Right here you can see just a little bit of separation between the two pieces of wood, but for the most part the seams look pretty good and pretty tight together. Now this was actually carried out not by clamping. I did not use a clamp at all on this top. The only thing I used to connect the top was these type of Climax connectors. Now this is the type of fitting that the Zeta P2 utilizes to connect wood. The Zeta P2 also has another type of connecting device that I have here in the shop, which is this one here, and this happens to be the Climax P14. Now this comes in a P14 and also a P10. The P10 would be for thinner stock. So the difference between the Climax fitting here, which is more of a clamp fixture, and this one, which is the Climax, is when I put the Allen key inside, it reveals this metal portion here, which gives you the ability to lock into the secondary device in your other piece of wood. Now, what the Lamello Zeta P2 gives you the ability to do, I kind of look at it, I kind of liken it to like Legos. It gives you the ability to put things together without glue so you can see how it looks. Now, it is not strong enough for heavier material like the 2x lumber that I used here. When I just put this portion together with the Climax fittings, it worked fine. It didn't come apart. However, when I put the legs on this particular little stool and I was trying to move it, the weight and the force of the legs and the combination of everything, it really started to kind of ply apart, if you will. Now, as I started off saying, these glue lines here that you can see, of which on this portion right here is pretty much non-apparent, but then right in here, and even here, this board is just a little bit more elevated than the other one. So if we put some sanding on here, I believe these glue lines will look even better. Now the benefit of using a Climax on something like on a project like this is the fact that, number one, you could trial it before you glue it up and see what it looks like. Number two, if you don't have a lot of clamps in your shop, you can utilize the Climax fittings, these right here, to pull your work together, and it will give you glue squeeze out as represented in one of my videos earlier. So it may not be the perfect solution for clamping, but it is definitely an option that you can utilize. Now, coming over here and taking a look at the machine itself. So here we already see what the domino is capable of with the tenons. This is a single tenon. So today we're going to take a closer look at the Climax fitting and look at what it looks like in conjunction to the domino. Now, I've come to realize that there are some limitations when you use the Lamello when it comes to the thickness of the material that you're going to use it with. So let's go ahead and hook it up to dust extraction and make a few mortises. So before we actually utilize the machine, let's take a look at it. You've got your power button here. You've got a setting portion here. And then right in here, I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can get back here. Right in here is a little silver dial that'll push against this red portion, and that's what activates the up and down motion that cuts the groove that we'll see with this particular that this device makes. Another thing that you should take into consideration if you were interested in purchasing a device like this is on the side you can see that you have a fence. You loosen the toggle here and it comes down, and unlike the domino, which has the ability to raise up and down, this portion of the fence is fixed. So you're going to have the same distance from the plate to the cutting edge that comes out. Let me show you the cutting edge really quickly. When I fold this back up, this is what the cutting edge looks like. It's a rotary type of device, similar to a biscuit joint. So while we have this set up, let's go ahead and make a couple of cuts with the machine. Now remember, the Zeta P2 does have the capacity to be converted into a biscuit jointer if that's something that you wanted to do. However, I find it's very expensive to just cut biscuits. Okay, so I have my Lamello plugged into my Festool vacuum into the AC port. The vacuum should turn on when I turn on the machine, and I'm using my Festool CT48 to collect the dust chips from this particular machine. So we're going to go right next to this area where I plunged with the domino, and we'll take a look at those different Alright, so if we take a look at where the mortise is on this board, we can see that it's towards the top of the board. So if we wanted this to be in the center of the board, if I wanted my mortise to be higher on this piece of material, I'm going to have to raise the material by a certain portion, and I'm not going to be able to use this top fence because this reference is not going to change from the fence, from this portion of the fence to here. So if I take my measurement from the base, right now I'm setting the device on the table, and if I set the device on the table, let's take a look at where the mortise is going to be when I just go flat and flush on the table. Okay, so as you can see, taking a closer look, the mortise is now the exact, well, not exactly the same, but basically it's closer to the bottom of the board, and where I would want my mortise to be in the center here. If you wanted this to be in the center, if you wanted the blade to come out in the center, you would have to line up this marking on the side with the center of your workpiece, which means you would need to have a line on the center of your workpiece and wrapping around the edge, because there's no way you're going to be able to see the side with this machine without laying it on here and looking at it from the side. So right here, I would take it like this, and I would look for where my center portion is on my piece of work, and there's a marking on each side, and with that marking, then I could plunge. Now as I look at this, the way that I have it set up, so if I want this to be centered in the board, then I would have to move this up to about here. So I'm guesstimating right now. And so whatever this known space is, like say that's about 1/4 of an inch. If I had 1/4 of an inch piece of material, that could be plywood, that could be something that you cut to that dimension, or it could also be a setup block. You can lay it across here to give this, to raise this whole machine up that much to get your center line here. So I don't know, this is as I look closer at this machine, I like it. I think it's very cool. It does what I wanted it to do, but it does require a little bit of thinking when you start talking about the mortises, because you do have to consider the way that the device was designed and the fact that it does not offer that up and down movement. You know, comparing it to the domino, right? The domino obviously does have the ability to pull the fence down and lock it. So these things are the same when we look at them on end like this. I unlock this and the fence comes down. So that's actually very similar, that particular functionality. But what the Lamello does not have is the ability, if you look on the back of the domino, there's measurements from 0 up to 30. And with this other toggle, I can unlock that. And then what it gives me the ability to do is to change the distance of my bit that's exposed here, the distance between the plate, the top plate, and the bottom. So that gives me increased functionality, or it gives me a range of where I can place my floating tenon in my workpiece. Like here, if you look at this, this is fairly centered on this workpiece. Well, it's a little bit on the high side, but because I was able to adjust this up and down, I was able to put that mortise in the place that I wanted it to be in with no extra accessories as far as this particular device. Now, by comparison, if I wanted to get that exact same functionality out of the Lamello, out of the box, and I do have this accessory fence, but as I look at it, it doesn't function in the way that would give the same functionality of the up and down type of cutting or setting of the blade. So you are 100% reliant on this side indicator, and there's one on each side again, to determine where the center of your workpiece is. So that, as I look at that, it's, I don't know, I'm trying to think in my head about how you would solve that problem, because the only thing I can think of is you put a piece of wood like this down on your bench, and then you set the machine on top of that. Now these aren't the same thickness, but you would want one for the front and one for the back. And this is cattywampus, this isn't the same height. So I guess let me just cut this piece real quick. Alright, so as I have these two pieces of material that are pretty much the same thickness, the same part, I would have to set my machine on something like this, and then when I pull this fence up in the top, then I'm able to go here and let's see where the different places are. So let's just look at that real quick. Let's look at the different placements. So these represent what you could do with the setup block to give you a place to put your machine, to raise it up, to move the distance between, you know, the top and the bottom as far as where you're placing the mortise. All right, so with it elevated like this, let's do another cut on this back side with it being flat first. So I'm gonna lay it flat, and actually I'm going to use the fence first. Let's use the fence first and do that cut again. So I'm resting the machine on top of the workpiece, and we're gonna cut a mortise. All right, here we go. We can see right here where the mortise is at the top. Now we're going to go on the bottom and basically use the tabletop as the base. So we're going to be riding on here and not on the fence on the top. So I'm going to unscrew here and tighten that down, and the machine sits flat on the surface. I turn it on. And after plunging, we can see how far down that is on this piece of work. Now, the other option of what we would do, like you would use either a known piece of material, or you could use setup blocks, which I think would be excellent for this. You could use setup blocks actually, just like I said, to set your table saw to cut something, a piece of wood like this, so you can mark them. And if you have a piece of material like this that you know that you're going to be using regularly, then you could pull out your spacers and set them on the table just like this. And then we're no longer referencing on the top. So if I put the fence down, right, as I raise this up, and I try to put the fence down like this, as you can see, looking at it from the side here, you can see that it's not touching the spacers on the bottom. So this is not going to work. So we have to take this back and tighten it down, and it has to rest solely on these spacers that I have on the bottom. And that is giving me my position. Okay, so now as we look at the cuts that have been produced. So this is going off of the fence, which leaves a little bit of material on the top. This is going off of the base of the machine, which leaves a little bit of material on the bottom. And then utilizing some spacers helps me to get this into the center of my workpiece. Now, when you're using the Zeta P2, that's something you have to keep into consideration. If you bought a machine like this and say you wanted to use it on materials like this. Now, if you're using it, say, like on plywood, maybe that's not as much of an issue. You're going to get that same distance from top to bottom. With this, when you pull the fence down in this position, you're going to have that same distance every time between the top and the bottom. And one of the things that I personally ran into was I was building a French cleat holder and I was recording the video, and I took a piece of plywood that was just a little bit too thin for this particular machine, and I didn't think to put the way that it's set on there, when it cut into the material, you could see that the circular cutter actually cut through the top of the material because the machine was not low enough. I needed to drop it below the surface of the wood in order to get it lined up, and so it did not work out. So in that situation, I would have had to take my spacers like this and put them underneath the piece to be cut itself. So you can see there's some little nuances when you use the Zeta P2. You either have to raise the base of the machine or you have to alter the level of the material. Those are just things that I found using this particular machine. And when I go to reach for a machine such as either the Domino or the Lamello Zeta P2, I have to think about that and factor that into my project, which sometimes can be I don't want to call it a headache, but it's just an extra step that you have to be mindful for, especially when you have a shop like mine where you have a bunch of different tools that you don't have a lot of experience with, and you're trying to switch from one tool to the next. Over time, you'll get up to speed and you'll be able to, fly through these things. But at the level that I'm at right now, I'm switching tool to tool, trying to anticipate which tool is best for which job. And the lack of adjustability on the Zeta P2 is something that I find to be a little bit of a challenge when you're using stock like this. It's interesting that they made it like this. I mean, I guess you would just say that this is more of a plywood type of machine. Let me see if I can find a piece of plywood and we could do a plunge into that so we can test that theory. Okay, so I have two pieces of wood here. This is a piece of plywood. This is just some kind of rough CDX plywood that's about, I want to say, 3/4 of an inch thick. And this piece of plywood is closer to a 1/2 inch thick. Now, I do not have the P10s or any 10 connectors that would work with the thinner material, but we're just going to make a cut with this machine to see where it places the mortise. And as I said, these are things you have to think about when you're going to buy a machine like this. I bought this machine off of the few videos that I saw, and the only way I could get this kind of working knowledge was to purchase it for myself, because nobody's going to loan me a machine like this and let me figure it out. So essentially, I guess you could say I'm the guinea pig in this test. All right, so I'm gonna let's go ahead and cut the 3/4 first. And we have it flat on the table. I'm going to try to fold down the fence and see where this rests. So I can slide this back and forth without it moving the machine. So we know that there's some space between the bottom of this fence here and the wood itself. So let's see where the cut is going to end up on this piece of scrap wood. Okay. So this is a 3/4 inch piece of wood, and it's just barely on the high side, meaning up towards the top. So what we would have to do is raise this piece of material a fraction off the table, or drop the machine just a fraction below it's sitting flush here in order to get that perfectly centered. Now you can still use it. If I take my little connector and put it in there, you can see where it is, but you can see clearly here, if you pay attention, that this portion is thicker than the top. And we can also get evidence of that by turning this board over and plunging on the other side. And we can see now that the thinner portion is on the top, and we can take this connector and pop it in there. And if you look from the side, I don't know if I can get that on screen, but basically this one's lower and this one's higher. And looking top down, I can see it clearly that there's an offset like this. So you have to be careful if you're using a machine like this. You have to be mindful of the fact that you're going at the same place on the piece of material, or else you'll end up with a situation where your connectors will not line up. All right, now we're going to try it with this piece of like 1/2 inch plywood. And obviously there's a great deal of a gap beneath here, but we're going to do it flat on the table and see how it works. All right, so you can see right there, there's like a half moon. You can see it there. So this material is way too thin for this particular machine. Now, it looks like, based upon the material on the top, I don't even know if this can cut, if this could make a mark if I dropped it down lower. But the bottom line is, this is the way that the mortise operates. Like right here, as it sits in there, you see I can push, but it's not coming out because there's a ridge right here that this portion is capturing when it slides in, right? So anyway, so as you can see, there are some limitations with the Zeta P2 as far as the material. Now, obviously, let's see if I raise this up a bit. Let's see what happens. I'm just gonna raise it up just by this amount, and we'll try to cut the same type of mortise in here and see what it does. So as you can see, it just did the same thing from the bottom, right? So this is too thin for the Zeta P2. Now, contrarily, we know that we can use the domino with this, with the 4mm cutter, and we can get right in there and get this done. So that is something to consider if you're trying to make a decision between the Lamello Zeta P2 and the Domino. This is going to be, you know, great for like say 3/4 inch plywood and something a little bit thicker than a 1/2 inch. That's what you would want to use this for, and you can use it on thicker material like this. However, you do need to be mindful of how you need to leverage with some kind of shim to move the cut to the center of your work if that's where you want it to be. Now, one of the good things that you could do with the Zeta P2, like say if you wanted to use, if you were really going to throw a lot of money at your project, you could make a cut on the top of another cut. So like right here, I'm positioning this over the other, the cut that's on the bottom. Let me lock this in. And as you can see, I can get away with 2 connectors, which will definitely give you a stronger connection because you have 2 connectors. Now, this right here, this doesn't feel, I'm trying to feel if there feels like there's any kind of on the bottom here. So when I set the Zeta P on the flat surface and cut this bottom one, I am able to feel a little bit of play in the wood here, which means that if you use the connector here, there's a chance that you could snap this piece off and cause damage to the top of your surface. Now this one here feels a little bit more robust, though it's not in the center, so you may be able to get away with a double connector like this and have a nice little connection. If you, now mind you, these need to be lined up appropriately in order for this to work out, but that's just something that you can do. So anyways, you guys have to let me know what you think about the Zeta P2, the functionality. Would you ever be interested in buying one? Do you think it's a good machine? Do you think it's too limited? I don't know. But the one thing I do like about it, it is very much like Legos when it goes to putting things together, and you could do a lot of cool things with it. I mean, if I wanted to cut, so the other, oh, let me just show you another limitation that I see with this particular machine, and I don't even need to make another cut to show you that. The width here. Let me see if I have a ruler. So just putting a basic ruler up on here. From edge to edge, this was about about 2 3/4 from this edge to here. So whatever material, like say you were putting face frames together and you wanted to use the Lamello Zeta P2, unless your face frame pieces are greater than 2 3/4, I mean 2 3/4 is like, that's the size of the opening. So you would want it to be a minimum of 3 inches as far as your face frame that you are building or anything that you are making. You don't really want to use anything less than 3 inches, and 3 inches is cutting it close, because if you did 3 inches, that would still only give you about 1/8 of an inch worth of wood material on each side as far as your connector. And it will also limit, if you were doing something that was thinner, like a thinner piece of wood, it would limit your glue surface area, because I don't know if I would trust just this clamp to hold my piece together. I would want this to just line things up and to hold it together temporarily, while the glue surface, which would be here and in between here, is where your wood would actually connect. Now if you look at one of the cuts, like on this piece of plywood here, and you see how the connector is kind of in the center, that's going to give you more glue surface area on both ends. Now this is a thinner piece of wood, so you got different constraints with this, but I wouldn't want this connector to be at the top like this or at the bottom putting so much pressure. You would want it more so in the center, I would think, which would give you ample gluing room. Like if this was in the exact center here, you would have a good bead of glue on the outside. Basically these two portions that are, these two mortises represent where the glue lines would be, and this centerpiece would be where the plastic connector would be. And I think that that would be a stronger joint than if you had to depend on something that was closer to the edge. And the other thing is too, if you're using plywood like this and you're going glue, you're putting glue all the way down your piece of material, these connectors, if you, this space here, this is a glue surface, this is a glue surface down here, and this is a glue surface, that's going to give you a good mating connection, and you're not fully reliant on these connectors. But let's say for instance you wanted to cut one of these kind of mortises like in the tip here, and you just wanted one, or maybe even if you did two, you would have to consider, okay, how far are these going to be apart in a piece like this? So you would set it up in this configuration, if you can see that. So you would go top to bottom and try to figure out where to put these in the center. And then you would be thinking about what the glue surface area is all around. Now, if you put one just in the center of here, that gives you a lot of glue surface on the bottom, a lot of glue surface on the top, and you know, I would say adequate in the middle, and then this just lines up your board to connect it. You could, I think, get away with that, and that's better on a 45-degree angle like that, because you don't have to worry about, well, let's try it out just the way that it is. Let's try that. So if I go flat and I put my connector here, actually let's mark it first so we can try to get the joints to line up. So I have this piece of wood here, and it's going to fit like this. Now these boards aren't perfectly beveled or whatever, so we're going to make a line across. I just have to ask, is your shop ever like this, where you find one broken lead, two broken lead, three broken lead, and two sheaths with no pencil in them? This is crazy. All right, finally I found a pencil, and we're going to make a line across here just like this. All right, and then we're going to cut a mortise in both of these, and we're referencing the top on both of these. So let's cut those mortises and see what it looks like. All right, so we line that up. Now, as I said, I didn't do the thing where I need to put my dust collection back on there. But you notice I did not try to raise it to put it into the center. We're just doing this as a trial. And we're going to take this one. Let me get my dust hose back on here, because we can see that using this without dust extraction, the hole fills up with a bunch of sawdust. And we're referencing the same side. All right, so we've got our male and our female portion. We will put, let's put the female portion on this bigger part here. Slide that in there. And then we'll take the male portion and pop it on here. So we've got our connections. And then we'll just go ahead and snap this together. Put it down like this. And the slidability of these gives you the ability to adjust the board back and forth once you get it together. So let's pop it together, and it snaps. And as you can see there, you got a nice little line. Now this board is kind of beveled down, but look at that connection. And I can even take a hammer to some degree and slide this just minutely back and forth if I needed to. But there you go, you've got that right angle connection using the Lamello Zeta P2. I don't know, man. I think connection devices like this are pretty cool. And that's where, even though I can do the same thing with the Festool Domino, this is going to clamp up and give me a glue line. And so if I put glue on here, the squeeze out will come and seal this up. And I don't need to try to figure out how to put clamps on the outside to clamp this together. It just works, you know? And you see, I could pick this board up like this and it's fine. Now I could bend it out. You see that gap? But you can see the type of force that it's putting. As I let it go, it's pulling it back too. So anyways, I think this is a pretty cool tool. I don't know, you know, who this is best for, at, you know, being a novice like myself, but it is a tool that I wanted to try. I saw videos on it, and I'll do more videos on this as I get to know the tool a little bit more, and so I can share with you guys. But as I said, it's a cool tool, and so we'll take a closer look at the Lamello later on this week. Hopefully this has been a little bit insightful. I know I was kind of jumping all over the place as far as talking about this particular machine and its connections, but being that the majority of the videos for this particular device were done in I might have been German, but basically it was a different language. I'm happy to have been able to buy a machine like this and bring it into my own personal garage shop and use it. Though I've not mastered it, I'm happy to be able to release information that is in English about this machine as I get to know it a little bit better, so that people make a little bit more of an informed purchase if they did consider something like this. And you know, I had a direct intention when I bought this machine along with my other 2, or actually 3 joinery devices. It was to do plenty of videos like this for my YouTube channel so that other people can get a little bit more information than what I got before I bought this. I took a huge plunge. I mean, many of you know, if you look this device up, it's not a cheap device, but I took that plunge, and the connectors are not cheap, so that I could find out for myself if I made a mistake, and I can pass that information on. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you for taking time to watch this little video, and I'll see you in my next one.